Hey all, it is Rocky Shore time. So we are moving on to 5.3 and we need to pay attention to rocky shores. So 5.1 was all about the ocean, 5.2 coral reefs. Now we're on to rocky shores. So what do we need to know from 5.3? First, we need to understand the organisms that live on rocky shores actually have a lot of experience variations, which means their temperature is going to change, the salinity is going to change, the availability of water and sunlight will change due to the tidal cycle. So obviously we know the higher or further away you are from the water, there's going to be biotic and abiotic factors that are affecting the organisms differently than lower on the shoreline, closer to the water. So let's talk about the zones of a rocky shore. First, we should know intertidal zone, that's going to be exposed to air during low tide and submerged during high tide. Subtidal zone, that's a permanently submerged, barely exposed area on a shoreline. Obviously, we know littoral, that's where land and water meet. So that's part of the intertidal and subtidal. Now, the shorelines, we have the splash zone. The splash zone is the furthest away from the water, meaning there are organisms that live there that are going to be splashed. It's going to be a lot more difficult to live in the splash zone because the water availability is less. The sunlight is more intense. Therefore, the temperature is more intense. Then we have the upper shore. The upper shore is going to be exposed when the tide is going out, meaning there's going to be a lot of temperature changes that occur in the upper shore because when high tide is in, right, so the tide is high, organisms have water, they have oxygen, the temperature is cooler. But then as the tide goes out to low tide, now that upper shore is going to experience very warm temperatures and it's going to be dry. Also, on the upper shore, organisms may actually be more susceptible to predation. When you're submerged underwater, you can hide. When you're not submerged underwater, that means there's nothing, you're exposed. Then we talk about the middle shore. The middle shore is only going to be exposed during low tide. So when the tide is going out, the upper shore is uncovered first, and then slowly the middle shore. So there's going to be a lot more life in the middle shore. Then we have the lower shore. That's where most of the life is found because, again, the lower shore is only going to be experiencing uncoverage of water during extremely low tides. And again, we have to remember the subtidal zone is barely exposed. So there's going to be more and more life as we get closer and closer to the water. Now, some biotic factors, right? Biotic means living, abiotic, non living. So, what are some factors that the organisms have to deal with in these different shore levels? We have to think about these different zones of a rocky shore, the amount of sunlight, the change in temperature, the change in salinity. That's going to happen throughout the day in a tidal cycle. And those are all going to be abiotic, they are non living. But some living factors could be predation, competition. A lot of organisms will actually, in the upper shore, find tide pools. Tide pools are actually, once the tide goes out, there's little puddles, I like to say, of water that are left behind. It's residual water. That water is going to be cooler than sitting on the rock. So that means that prevents desiccation if they can make it to a tide pool. They're also going to have oxygen, and they may even have food in that tide pool. And it'll allow for a little bit of reprieve from how hot it is and the fact that they're exposed to air. Now, these tide pools also protect the organisms from possible predators. Is it 100% protection? Absolutely not. Now, where are we going to see competition the greatest? Actually, on the lower shore. And that's because there's a lot more life that lives in the lower shore. So it's important to remember, yes, there is competition in the upper shore, but there's going to be greater competition as we get closer to the lower shore. What are some organisms that live in these different zones? First, the splash zone. We're going to see periwinkle snails, limpets, and they're usually going to have a shell because when they don't have water that's close to them because they're in the splash zone. So splash zone means that there's waves coming in. If the tide is low, the splash from the waves might not actually be reaching them. So they're going to have shells that allow them to seal onto the rock. which prevents them from losing excess water and drying out, or what we say desiccating. The upper shore, we have barnacles and limpets, same or similar adaptations as the splash zone. Then we have middle shore organisms. We have mussels and hermit crabs. Mussels are known as bivalves. They have two shells, and they can actually open and close their shell to control the amount of water, salinity, oxygen that are in their body, depending on if it's high tide or low tide. So they can adjust. Lower shore, that's going to be where a lot of life is. So we're going to see starfish, seaweeds, which is kelp, crabs, all of these organisms, if they are exposed to air, their roots for a seaweed might be still in the water. Starfish, they're going to be able to attach to the substrate with their tube feet in order to prevent being swept out into the ocean. Crabs, they can actually hide in crevices to prevent being swept away by the waves, but also protect them from predators. And you have to think, where are predators coming from? They're land organisms, which means anything that's flying above, like a bird. These predators in the splash zone and the upper shore these organisms are going to be more susceptible to those predators than the organisms that live in the lower shore. Are there other predators? Yes, of course, but during the high tide and low tide cycle, during low tide, we're going to see the upper shore and splash zone definitely be more susceptible to terrestrial predators. So that was 5.3, the rocky shore. Again, Cambridge syllabus is going to be your best learning center because you need to know what learning outcomes you need, and you need to make sure that you understand how the questions will be asked of you. So again, Cambridge syllabus on the Cambridge website. And if you liked this video, go ahead, like and subscribe, and I'll see you for 5.4.